When people rise up together,
come on.
When people fight together,
come on.
Change comes, success comes, deliverance comes. We're going to make sure that every vote is counted. Every single vote. Every vote's getting counted. I am pleased to announce that Joseph R. Biden has received 16 votes for President of the United States.
Well, hello. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am live, and this is another episode of Mondays with Miko, a very exciting one. It's an episode in which I have a special guest, and you are going to find out about me for real, like my ancestry. I had a DNA ancestry test. But before we go there, today is International Women's Month. And how exciting. I wanted to start with a short little video, and I wanted to honor Madam Stacey Abrams for all of her hard work, and she still is on the ground, and we can see how they're fighting, right? How folks that want our vote to be oppressed, they will continue to fight, and they are fighting, right? And they can't fight legitimately, so they fight illegally and crookedly. And they use the laws and they use their power to oppress us. But she ain't taking no for an answer. So big ups to Stacey Abrams. Hello, Wanda. Good to see you tonight. So on that note, me and my day-to-day job are on the ground, y'all. There is an election in the city of Marion. There is a mayor as well. Good evening, Earlene. Mayor as well as a few city council seats are up for re-election. And what we do, some people get confused, when they see me with Pick 42 Foundation and Black Voters Matter. We're just out there trying to get our community to understand that their vote counts and that their vote matters. And to let everyone in our community know that it is time to vote. Early voting opens on March 15th. So they can literally go, if you live in the city limits of Marion, you can go and vote starting March 15th. And we're going to give you the tools. We're going to let you know when the vote is, and then hopefully we'll be able to take you to vote if you do not have a ride. Okay, so not hopefully, we will take you to vote. If you can't get there, we will take you there, And hey, Dad. My dad, he's going to hear about our ancestry. So, okay. So anyway, when we think about the elections and folks that don't want us to vote, guys, you got to ask yourself why. There's a whole band of, I call them the syndicate. And the syndicate is out there to steal our votes, to disenfranchise us. And we know who they are. As a community, we need to root them out. We don't need to continue to let that go. Elections are for real. Elections are about power. The city of Marion is 70% African American. We cannot allow 2 or 3 people who are getting paid to steal our right to vote. So we got to get out there, and you got to talk amongst your friends and family and tell them, hey, look, get registered. We got 1 more week to register. Next Saturday is the deadline for voter registration. 1 more week, and every single vote matters. The last election that elected a mayor in the city of Marion was won by 120 votes. That's nothing. You know, so every single vote matters. And then if you think about it, there's a lot going on. I started with Stacey Abrams and kind of what's going on in Georgia, right? They're amped up. Well, check this out. In the state of South Carolina, our governor, Henry McMaster, he's up for re-election next year. We're going to be talking about that. He's up for re-election. But he today posted a letter that he sent to the General Assembly. Let me see if I got some notes. First of all, Henry McMaster's sycophancy to Donald Trump is dangerous to South Carolina. We know what Donald Trump did to the whole country on January 6th. And we know what our government allowed him to get away with. We saw it with our own eyes. But we are living in a state right now in South Carolina where our governor is embracing Donald Trump and the big lie. He sent a letter today. And his letter, he wants the Republican-led legislature to appoint people to sit on the election committee. You know why, y'all? Because we're on the ground. And if something happens in South Carolina, like it happened in Georgia, they want to be able to have that phone call made and throw out your votes. It means a lot. And I'm going to just say one more thing. And this is what I'm going to say, is that slavery did not end in South Carolina. My friends that are listening to this in other cities and other states, it's different here in South Carolina. It is different. It never ended. All slavery did was get rebranded with new names and a different flavor. But the oppression is still here. The minimum wage is meant to keep us down. The access, the way our businesses are treated, and anything else, all has happened since 1863 is folks who don't even look like us, who may be poor or don't have the means, have also continued to be oppressed. We need to rise up as a people. And that is what Stacey Abrams is saying. Okay, so we got to. And I'm going to give y'all some more information as we go. I'm doing some research. I'm taking some classes about the history of South Carolina. Slavery started here. And I am, yes, Erlene says it's a new face, but it's still the same. It is still the same. You know, and let's just go ahead for a little bit and mention about reparations. Today, you guys are going to find out about my DNA. I took a DNA test, but I'm also have been on Ancestry.com, right? And so I've been hearing people, even Democrats, white Democrats, that are saying, why should I have to pay reparations? I didn't do it. Well, let me tell you, my great-grandmother was born in 1908. That was 55 years after slavery. Remember, slavery just ended. The 40 acres and a mule didn't happen. There was no opportunity for people who look like me. So that means my great-great-grandmother, she was born into slavery. And my husband's family is even closer to that. His mother was born in 1927. Equity has to return to this. It's never been here. America has never dealt with its original sin. And our communities are suffering for it. But it's going to end. And it could only end with your help. It could only end if we vote. Okay? So I'm going to have more to say. I don't want to take away from my guests that I have tonight. And I'm so excited. I'm going to be bringing her in just a minute, in just a couple seconds here. Thank you so much. Hello, Wanda. And we have some people watching on YouTube today. It's just, this guest is so exciting. And her name, I'm going to go ahead and bring her on, and then I'm going to tell you her name. Hello, Pamela.
Hello, how are you doing today?
Good, good. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is Pamela Bailey with the Big Family Search Project.
Yes,
So
and I'm sure a lot of your guests know me because Mullins is my hometown. So,
well, yeah, I started off when we first started talking. It's the question that I'm always asked, and that is, who are your people?
right. And that's funny because I get used to being asked, where you from? And I'm like, but when I'm home, it's who are your people? We're trying
That's
to
right.
identify which tribe in the city are you from?
That's right. That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much for coming to the show. Thank you so much. I have been following you and I watch your videos and I am just amazed at the work that you're doing. And I won my DNA test.
You did.
I did. And so when I got it, girl, I could not wait. One, I want to tell everybody the process, right? I definitely want to tell everybody the process. And I don't know if anybody else had this experience, but when I took the DNA test, you got to spit into a tube. I was like vomiting. I thought it was gross. I thought it was so disgusting, but I wanted to know the answer. I had to push past. I'm like, you can do it, Miko. You can spit in this tube.
Well, it's actually
So
gotten a little better. It used to be that you used to swab your cheeks, but they found out that a lot of people would not get enough material to do that. So then it's only been recent, they've changed it to that process, and it is a lot more accurate.
it's not good though. I have a problem with saliva anyway. You know what I mean? So like seeing it in the tube, but y'all, let me tell you, if you do it, push past that. Push past it. And we're gonna go into you're gonna help me break down what my results showed. And I actually had some things come up that proved that my results were 100% accurate. Some local stuff. So we'll get to all that. So before we
But
do,
before we get started with that, can I just say to you that I've been watching you too, and I
oh,
really want to tell you how much I appreciate, your boots on the ground, sort of attitude, how you've come in and become a part of my family in Mullins, and I
I
just
love
see
it.
you do so much stuff, and I'm like, again, I'm glad to have the opportunity to meet you, but I really, really appreciate all of your work because you're working for my family essentially, right? And so again, just to see some of the strides that the community has made in the last year, in the last 2 years, it just blows my mind. And I'm really grateful to you and Kelly Williams and the new mayor and different ones who really tried to make some very positive changes so that everybody can be a part of this process and be represented. And so that makes my heart happy. So I've been watching you too, ma'am.
Okay. We're watching each other. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I appreciate it. I love Mullins. I do. I love Marion County. It's
Hmm.
like it's like living on vacation.
You know
Love
what's
it,
so
love it.
cool about it? I wonder, I say, how many people who lived away from home as long as I've lived away from South Carolina, because I graduated from South Carolina State University,
Mhm.
HBCU, and then I moved on after that. And that's been over 30 years ago. But anytime I say I'm going home, I'm talking about I'm coming to Mullins.
That's
And
right.
so, yeah, it's going to always be home to me.
Awesome. So tell us about the Big Family Search Project. What is it? Fill
Yes.
everybody in.
Sure. So the Big Family Search Project is really a descendant reunification project. Now, what I'm going to tell you is I had the blessing of growing up in Mullins where my parents knew a good little bit about their family history. So they knew at least the places where they were located, and they had lots of stories. So my father, and if you all don't know me, my dad was Bruck Campbell, who used to have the store on Barn Street Groceries. It had been in our family for years and years. And he would tell us these amazing stories about people we were related to and where we were from and our families are from in the Peter region of South Carolina. And my mother was a singer. Her name was Eunice Campbell. So a lot of the people in Mullins remember that she was a teaching assistant in Mullins for a long time, or they worked with her at other places. But my mother gave us the music. I started singing at about the age of 5 years old. And I didn't know, and I don't even know if it's intentional, if she realized that she was giving us, literally giving us back our history in song. And so I'd been asked once I left, I'd been asked once I'd left Mullins, like, where are you from? But again, people were asking me very differently than the people in Mullins. They actually were asking me what country I was from. So that's
Oh,
what made me, yeah, but consistently for over 35 years. And so that's what made me do the DNA test.
oh, well, check this out. So Stephen Hurnett says best penny cookies too.
You better know it.
So what's a penny cookie? See, I'm a Jersey girl. You gotta fill me in. What's a penny cookie?
You could get a handful of cookies. 25 cents would get you 25 cookies. But what you had to do, here's the trick, because there was tax when you got to 25 cents. So you
Uh-huh.
kids would come in, buy 24 cookies, and then get that penny back and make a separate purchase for that last cookie. But they usually came in great big jars. And, again, it's one of those things that it's a happy memory of your childhood. And I will say, you know, no, no community is perfect, but I was very protected by the community that I grew up in. And that's what I have learned, used to be, I guess, the Reeves area when I was
Yeah.
before slavery ended. But my family stayed in all of that area, and they were very protective of me. So again, I grew up in a really amazing community with just some awesome, incredibly protective people who really are responsible for me doing everything that I'm doing now.
Okay. And so where are you? Where do you live today?
I live in North Dallas, so I moved to the Dallas, Texas area about almost 13 years ago. And yeah, so I'm here for now until retirement, and then I'll be heading on back to the Carolinas.
Yes. Look, the penny cookies are a hit on our comments. Okay. Erlene
Yes.
says that 2 for a penny.
All
They say
right.
your dad sold 2 for a penny.
Yes, yes.
Awesome. Awesome. So and we're going to get into my DNA in a minute, but of the things that you have encountered as part of the Big Family Search Project, is there anything that kind of stands out to you, like a oh wow moment?
Oh, yeah. There are a couple of things. I think the first thing is not really realizing that I am related to almost everybody in Mullins. And I am still finding out, especially by talking to some of the elders, when I ask about their family members, and I find out that they came from the same families that my family came from in Clarendon County or in Horry County that migrated to that area. So that's been one big thing. But I've had some amazing surprises. If you have a second, I wanted to tell you about an incident on a train here in Dallas.
Please, yes, do. In
Oh,
Dallas?
in Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
So understand that I don't have any biological family in Dallas except for my children and my husband that came, when we moved here to Dallas. So never even thought about having any family in Texas. And but it's been amazing because I've become very, very aware of how connected we really all are all across the country. So once I started doing this research and I found out how our families had been forcibly migrated from South Carolina, to Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and on to Texas, it made me really aware that I could have family here or would have had family that was enslaved here. Because most of the African Americans who are in the state of Texas are descended from people, they've been here for, 6, 7 generations, who were brought here from other states. Because
Right.
Texas was the last state that, legally held enslaved people. So I have gotten to
Oh,
the point
that's
now.
interesting. So Texas was the last state
Hmm.
that legally held enslaved people.
Right.
And I guess they had to kind of transport them too, right? I mean, just think
Absolutely.
about that transportation from Africa to America, horrendous. But then now they had to transport them from South Carolina
Mhm.
through to Texas. Wow.
Yes. And when you think about it, people, again, were treated, as you see on documents, as chattel.
Right.
So there may have been times when, women and children may have been migrated, I'm sorry, may have been given a chance to ride some in a wagon, but for most people, they were walked across the country. Sometimes, they may have been put on a ship and they would have been bought, into like the Galveston, Texas area. But what's interesting is that when you read these documents, these historic documents, they talk about people as if they are shipments. Like you could buy people on credit. You could, sort of have a layaway plan where you could buy now and, get people sent to you and, make a payment plan for that. Sometimes even banks held people, banks were built to hold people in the bottom of the building as collateral. And so
Wow.
it is really interesting. They literally had to be transported in some way, which usually meant walking. So I just want to share this real quickly, and I'll go launch into that story. So much of our experience has been captured in music. So when you hear songs like "Walk with Me, Lord, walk with me," they're literally talking about walk with me as I'm leaving my family from South Carolina and being walked across the country. So these are songs that our parents and our grandparents taught to us, and we had no idea how deeply tied to the experience these songs were. So we weren't written about in history books properly, honestly. So our families did what they could do, and they taught us these songs so that we would know their experiences. So I
In
see this
church.
guy.
In
Oh yeah,
church.
in
Okay, I'm
church.
sorry. So
That's
back to the
okay. That's
train.
okay.
Back to the
So I
train.
see this guy on the train, and immediately I think that he reminds me of someone who works with me, a colleague at the university where I work. And when I see the guy, I say, if I ever get a chance to see him, because it's a random person who gets on the dart when I get on the train to go, ride into the city like a lot of business people do. And so it just so happened one day the train stopped. It was crowded. I got on the train. The very next stop, this man gets on the train. And I thought, here's my opportunity. And this project has emboldened me, honey. I will talk to anybody. And so I see this guy, and I've started telling people, listen, I know this sounds really strange, but you really remind me of someone. And I ask him if he knows this guy. And he goes, no, he doesn't. So as he's talking to me, I'm watching him and his head movements and his facial movements and even how he moves his body. It actually reminds me of my brother, Craig Campbell from Mullins, and my maternal
Wait, your brother
cousins.
is Craig Campbell?
Craig is my brother. And so
Oh
he teases us because he knows everybody in Mullins, and he says we
wow.
remain
Him and my
distinct in the
husband are
house.
like
So
this.
yeah. I've known your husband since I was a kid, and so I get on so I'm talking to him, and I say to him, "Are you a Dallasite? Like, are you originally from Dallas?" And he says to me, "No, I'm from South Carolina." And I say, "What part of South Carolina are you from?" And he tells me he is from Andrews. Well, I don't know that I have any family in Andrews, but I knew that when I started doing my genealogy about, 12, 13 years ago, that I had ancestors who had been enslaved in Andrews, South Carolina. Williamsburg County is what it was, district. And so I say to him, I ask him his name. He tells me his name. It's not a name that's familiar to me. I've never heard it before. And I say, I've got my DNA app on my phone. Would you mind if I put your last name in to see if there's anybody who's related to me who has your last name? Because like you are so familiar to me. And he says, well, I haven't taken the DNA test. And I say, oh, that's okay. But if anybody in the world has his last name and they're related to me, it'll tell me. So I put the man's name in, and sure enough, two people pop up on the screen. And I say to him, I don't know who these people are. I don't know where they are, but there is a young man and a young woman who have your last name, and they are my cousins. And he says, can I see your phone? And I show him the phone, and he looks at my phone and he says, I don't know that young man, but the young woman is my daughter. So
Wow.
when I tell you that we are connected to people all across this country, so even when I do workshops, in different states and different cities, and I share like the music because I'm a singer and I share some of this history through music, and I ask the people who were in the room, do you know these songs? And they say, yeah. And I say, well, how do you know these songs? And they'll say, well, my grandmother taught me or my great grandmother. And I say to them, understand when they learned these songs, there was no radio,
Right.
there wasn't television. These are songs that people who were transported across the country, who walked across the country, they took that with them. They couldn't
Yep.
take their families, but they took their culture and that includes the music. So it's very rare that I go into any of the southern states that historically held enslaved people for hundreds of years,
Right.
where they don't know this music and these songs, and
And
it's
let me
because
tell
we're
you, because we took it with us. I'm sorry for cutting you out there.
Mhm, mhm.
I'm a Jersey girl, and we talked about the fact that I spent 10 years in Charlotte. Well, in Charlotte, I went to St. Paul Baptist Church. St. Paul Baptist Church had a hymn choir, and that's all they sung. So every Sunday, we got at least 2 hymns, and to no music. They would stomp their feet. They would use like pipes, like different the way it was done back then. And the hymn choir music is just beautiful, and they talk about things like blood in the water. You can take my body, but you can't take my soul. And so it's like these are stories of what actually happened.
Oh, what actually happened.
I can't wait for us to be able to go back. I still, even though I didn't live in Charlotte anymore, I would watch them online. But the St. Paul Baptist Church hymn choir is A+. Okay, so we could talk. Let's just dive in. Let's go. I
Mhm.
want to see.
Okay, okay.
Okay. So y'all, so let me tell y'all what happens, right? So you have that discussion process where you have to spit in the tube, and then you send this stuff over, and then they keep you updated. It takes about a month. It took about a month, and they kept texting me to let me know, okay, here's your DNA is here, and then it's there, and now we're processing it, and then you get a text to say it's here, and then when I got it, let me show you. Is it okay to show the Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna show y'all guys. All right. I think this is the right one. That's it. You get this, and you get a map too. But when I got this, y'all, I have been no good since. I have been walking around, and I got some stories to tell. But I have been walking around like I'm Nigerian. It's like I found myself.
Mhm.
So amazing. Okay, so help break this down for me.
Okay, I will. I will. And let me just say this before we get started is that that's the number one thing people typically will ask me if I'm from Nigeria. And
Oh,
very often it was Nigerian people who would ask me. And what they've told me is not just that we still have those facial features and things like that, but I've been
uh-huh.
told it's the way that I stand, it's the way that I walk. And so it made me understand that you really have to love and appreciate who you are and where you come from, because we tend to want to change and be different. And everything about us has been beautifully made, and we carry the ancestors with us. So this is exciting. So let's
We
talk
do,
about.
and and on that, like for me, um, it was always like because there's fair skinned folks in my family, right? And so it's like, oh, we're Indian or we're this or we're that. But like getting my ancestry and truly being able to embrace my Africanism, if that's a word, I may have made that up, but that's how I feel. It just feels so good. And then real quick, um, I was on a call, I was on a Zoom call the other day with a brother from Congo, and I'm looking at him. I'm looking at him. I'm gonna tell this story real quick. I'm looking at him. I'm like, oh my goodness, he looks like me.
Mhm, mhm,
He looks like
mhm,
me. And so I'm sending him messages in the Zoom chat, like, I just got my DNA test.
mhm.
And my DNA shows that I'm from the Congo too, my ancestors. It's so invigorating.
It is. It's home. It makes you feel grounded. And what I say to people, of course I'm African American. I'm an American, proud to be an American, but this makes me appreciate even more, my ancestors' struggle, knowing from all the different places that they came from, and that they
Yes.
survived.
Survive.
They you had to have the will to live. You have to
Yes.
have the will to live. And so it does make me very proud. It makes me very grounded. And it's just important to know. I have a few friends who are adopted, and they've said to me, listen, we are so grateful and we love our adopted family, but there's always a desire to know more deeply who you are and where you come from. And when I say to people, we've got different stories, but as far as I'm concerned, you do have a God-given right to know who you are. Like,
Yeah.
it's important. It doesn't diminish who I am in any other area of my life. In fact, it makes me, probably connect with people who are different from me because they know where they're from. Now I know
Right.
where I'm from.
Yes. So tell people, who is Miko Pickett?
Miko Pickett. Okay, so this is so cool. This is so cool. And I'm gonna let's talk about the breakdown.
Okay.
Now, the first thing that I find when I look at your DNA is that you are in a smaller group of African Americans like myself, where you will find most African Americans who have gone through this legacy, this experience of coming through the legacy of slavery, is that they are generally have somewhere between 12 and 25% European DNA. You do
Oh,
not.
I know, I don't.
No, you don't. You've only got about 8%.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's 3%. And
Wow.
so, what I find with a lot of African Americans who come from this legacy, who are particularly are from South Carolina and even North Carolina, is that we tend to have smaller percentages if our families have, kind of come to this legacy of European DNA. And, for many people that I meet, like, again, it doesn't diminish the experience, but it's important because you have to understand that most of us who do have a lot of European blood in us, it is because of, years and generations of sexual assault on
Right.
Black women by slaveholders, their sons, other family members,
Right.
white overseers. And so that, for many of us, is what that is indicative of. And
Right.
so, like my husband, whose family had early North Carolinians, have been in this country for hundreds of years. He's in the other part of, that group. And he, like many African Americans whose families have told them that they are part Native. Now, for my family, that's true. And that did show up in my DNA. But for 85% of the African Americans claim that we are Native because that's what we've been told, when
That's right.
actuality is closer to 15% because our families wanted to explain the difference in the skin tones
Mm-hmm.
without having to tell us the horror of the experience.
Wow.
And
But
so
let me
it was.
let me tell you, I've been hearing drums. Like, I hear the drum beats. It's and it's I'm serious. It is something about having this DNA done, having it come back, and having African countries at the top, the majority, it's just means something. It just, and then I can see, the migration patterns and all that stuff. But let me go. Let me let you do your thing. Because, girl,
Okay.
I'm just
Okay.
like
So,
giddy.
now, the reason that you have the mix of Nigeria, Cameroon, Mali, Benin, Togo, so we tend to have at least maybe 3 or 4 countries represented for most of us. And that is because when enslaved people were brought over primarily through the transatlantic slave trade, we were separated and we were sent to different regions, even within the state.
Okay.
Now, we do know that some of the earliest enslaved people in South Carolina came over from the Caribbean. They've been brought from Africa and to the Caribbean, and they were what they called seasoned, which means that they were broken down
Right.
and then brought over to this country. But they were separated very often because slaveholders wanted to make sure that there were language barriers amongst
Right.
the different people coming from different countries because they were afraid of revolt and rebellion if people could talk to each other.
So now,
And
question
so,
question for you,
mhm,
and I don't want to take away from the seriousness of that,
that's
because
okay.
that is real. Like, all these different countries are showing up, so because they didn't want us to be able to communicate with each other, That's why my DNA has multiple countries in Africa. But you said something I wasn't aware of, and you talked about one is 8 o'clock. I want to get this question out. Can I have maybe 15 extra minutes
Oh,
or
you can have
more?
as much time as you need. This is
Okay.
Mullins. I wouldn't do
Okay.
this anyplace else, but this is Mullins, so we can take all the
Awesome.
time you have.
Awesome. So I'm going to be honest. I love Negril, Jamaica. When I go to Jamaica, I feel a connection there. So are you saying that some Africans were taken, because I know there were enslaved Africans in the Caribbean, but some of them were taken from the Caribbean and then sent to the States?
Absolutely. When you think about it, out of 12 million enslaved people, Black people that were bought out of Africa to be enslaved, 500,000 or so came to this country. And so many of them came during the colonial times, which is what the 1619 project is about. So
Right.
they were here before, the Pilgrims or the Mayflower, right? But then, it was a continuous, bringing people, to this country. So a lot of the Europeans, especially the English, had already established colonies on the islands. They had slavery there before it was established here. So King George III, who was in power at the time that South Carolina and North Carolina, which actually used to be one place, it was just the Carolinas before they were broken up, he would give his wealthy friends land. And for every person that they bought, including enslaved people, they would receive acreages of land, maybe like 50 acres of land per person. So if you bought 100 enslaved people, plus your family, you got acreage for each of those people. That was called head rights. And so that is how so many people were able to establish wealth so quickly in this country. It wasn't because they were more talented or, it wasn't because they were just, of course, better in any way. It was because, a lot of them had already come from wealth and wealthy families. And then the king gave them additional wealth. So after that first wave of the most wealthy people coming, then others from different countries were able to come over. And again, they had the benefit of, if they participated in this process, they would be given land. So they were incentivized to enslave people to gain wealth.
Wow. Wow. Oh wow. So that's very, very deep, and makes a lot of sense, especially that income wealth gap. I know it doesn't 100% correlate, but it makes sense,
Well, it
right?
correlates a lot because even a lot of the plantations to this day are, and this is really interesting. When I started, the Big Family Search, I started traveling to various plantations where my family had been enslaved. And you will find that there are a lot of people who are descended from the slaveholders who still live on and benefit from the plantations, especially when they've been turned into entertainment venues. So one of the
Wedding
things,
venues. Yes.
right. So one of the
Yes.
examples I share with people is, imagine, even at your age, and you're a younger person, but even at your age, if you had spent your entire adult life never having to pay rent or a house note,
Right.
all the wealth that you make, you would just keep that.
You would just keep it.
Right,
And that's what we want for our children, right? We want
right.
but our people, descendants of enslaved Africans, we didn't get that opportunity.
We didn't. We didn't. And a lot of people don't even know that when there was the promise of the 40 acre and the mules, there were some opportunities when the Freedmen's Bureau actually tried to broker these deals where
Right.
people could work this land. Well, there was reparation in this country, but the reparation went to people who were a part of the Confederacy. So Black people had already started working land in many places and turning a profit, and they were starting to lift their families, I mean, just within a few years out of slavery, sort of into a place where they could develop and have wealth. But then because our government was still trying to sort of pacify, Southerners who had been a part of the Confederacy, they gave them back the land. And so people who had started making gains were now with nothing.
With
They got
nothing.
nothing.
And
Right.
that's where I say elections have consequences. The president at the time, who was impeached for his wrongdoings, decided that he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to do it. So off with that. Off with that order.
Yeah, well, let me just say this one thing before, and we need to continue to look at your DNA. But it's interesting, and I'm working on a project in addition to this to talk about how history repeats itself, because I'm learning about. There was a lot of talk last year about a South Carolinian by the name of Ben Tillman, who was a part of the Red Shirts, and his goal in life was to terrorize Black people who wanted to
Right.
vote. And he wanted to run for president. And one of the things that he did was to start this whole idea that if he lost the election, it would be because people were stuffing ballot boxes. So there are no new
Sound
ideas.
familiar? It all sounds, everything repeats itself.
Everything repeats itself because we're learning from the same playbook.
Right.
And I don't think that this is everybody. I mean, there's some people definitely who have made progress, who understand that, again, it's about humanity. And you have got to be, if you're going to be a righteous human being, you got to be fair to people.
But here's the thing, but the nefarious ones, such as our previous president, they go back into history. They go back into history to figure out, how do they do this to us? How is he going to stay in office? So he just follows the playbook, right?
You're right. Now,
He
if I
follows
had
the
done this
playbook.
if I had done this research, I would know that, right? It's still shocking to me to see the same things that happen, to see in the Federal Writers Project that captures narratives from formerly enslaved people. I go back and I read those interviews from the 1930s, and I look at, I read these stories where people were voting for the first time, or who actually had parents maybe even voted for the first time in Reconstruction, and they talk about how these people who were trying to keep them from voting would walk across the street and get names off of headstones so that they could, make their vote more popular, or how they would impose these taxes, poll taxes, but they would pay poll taxes for part of the population, knowing that the poorest African Americans would not be able to pay those same taxes. So injustice,
And fear tactics, right? So I
right?
just had someone call me yesterday and tell me about a fear tactic that was run around here, where
Mhm.
people were afraid to vote because they thought their utilities would be cut off.
Right.
Because
And
the
so
folks that run the utility companies told them, don't vote, or vote for this person or
right,
else.
right.
But
And
I'm
we
here to
just
tell
have
you, if you're listening, I'm sorry, I'm gonna let you get in, but I gotta
no,
put this
no,
thing out. If you're listening, the vote is secret. No matter what, they do not and cannot. This is somebody in technology telling you. They do not know who you voted for. They do not know. Now they can threaten, right? They can give you money. Take it if you want to. But when you go into the voting booth, it's you and your conscience. No one will know. Vote what's
and,
right,
right,
period.
but also use what you have available to you. If you are in the presence of someone who's threatening you, pull out your cell phone. Pull out your cell phone and say, I need you to repeat that. Like,
Okay.
if you are telling me something, especially if you are employed,
And
you
send it
know,
to Miko. I have
but,
footage. I
but,
do. Girl, I have videos and footage of things that have happened in Marion
mhm,
County. I got the
mhm,
tapes. I got the receipts.
mhm.
Right?
But,
And people, but there's still a fear,
right.
right? There's
But,
still a
but
fear that,
But this is
you know,
everybody's responsibility. It's not just up to Black people to protect, or minorities to protect each others. It's for people who say they really believe in what America stands for. If you really are a patriot in the truest sense of the word, and you really believe that this country should be one person, one vote, and that everybody votes counts, then when you see things like this happen, you have to intervene. You have
yes.
to be willing to say what this person's telling you is not true.
Yep.
And you say to the person who's giving this information that, I will report you. So this is
Part.
everybody's responsibility. And again, you cannot ever get to a place where you can maximize what's best for everybody if you're focused on having a part of your community lose. If over half of your community loses out on resources, everybody loses.
Everybody loses. But let's go ahead and get back.
Okay,
Listen, it's
so
so
the
funny,
DNA.
y'all. I hope you
Oh,
guys are still there with us. If you're watching this on replay, this has been a great conversation. You know, I got started to talk a little bit about my DNA, but it's funny, every single time it always comes back to voting, right? We're talking about my ancestry and we're having a big conversation on voting. Look at that.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm sorry. So now, and so you explained why there's that mix of Africanism. Why is Nigeria, the fact that Nigeria is at the top, does that mean anything?
Well, yes, it just means that an overwhelming majority of the people who were brought to this country, who were enslaved in this region, were from the country that is now, we now know as Nigeria. And so again, people tend to think, first of all, I have to constantly tell people Africa is not a country, it is a continent.
The continent, right?
And it has, hundreds of countries. And, there were lots of different African countries then. And so people living in neighboring countries didn't speak the same language. They had their own customs, sometimes their own religions. And so, but Nigeria, all the places that you're seeing are places that are on the coast where it was very prevalent to capture enslaved people, to bring them over to this country and other places in the world, of course, South America as well. And also, I saw Spain in yours.
Yeah, Spain and
Now,
Ireland. Can you address those two?
yes, well, some of the earliest settlers in Marion County were from Ireland. And so you're going to find a lot of African Americans from the PD region. If they are from this place ancestrally, then they're going to have that Ireland in them as well. Now, it's interesting because my brother and I share mother and father, but my DNA skews a different way. So if I can remember correctly, I don't know that I have England or Ireland, but he does. So that's why if you have a sibling, it's important that you both take it. But in Spain, I was asking if you had North Carolina family because there were Spaniards who came over to this country in the 1500s and Africans have remained in this country, but primarily in what we now know as North Carolina. Since the 1500s. And so very often you are going to find African Americans who have still that Spaniard blood from the 1500s. So there's a good chance that your family or parts of your family have been in this country for a very, very long time.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. So, and then, I mean, look at this map, really tells it all. I mean, that journey from everything that's in color, guys, is on my chart. Everything that's in color is on my chart. And all the way across the ocean is where little old me ended up. In this little yellow, bluish kind of section. Okay.
Right.
Okay. And so, and on the Irish part, you were saying, how does that tie in?
So let me tell you, there is a book that was written in around 1902, still available even online, by a man called W. Sellers, like Sellers, South Carolina.
Okay.
And he writes specifically about Marion County, and he tells you about all the families who settled in that area. So most of the people that you know in Mullins, both black and white, are descended from these families. And it has all the names, like my family names that are Campbell and James and Vereen and DeWitt and Reeves and Williams. And oh gosh, I just found out recently that I'm related to the Troys and the Simmons as well. But all of these places and these people are mentioned in this book, and it tells you where these families have come from. And when this book was written, he talks about many of these families being first generation, from Ireland. For my Campbells, the enslavers came from Argyllshire in Scotland.
Oh, okay.
And so that's a book that I would recommend.
And what's the name of that book again? I'll
It's
put it out
called
there.
The History of Marion County.
Okay.
And it's by W. Sellers. And if you will go to the Library of Congress online, which is just loc.gov,
Mm-hmm.
You can actually put that into their search and it will pull up the entire book.
Wow.
But I learned a lot of information specifically about my family from history books. My Gerald family is written in several history books. So it's been amazing because, again, as you said when you started, South Carolina used to be the New York of the day because of slavery. It was
Oh,
a
yes.
very, very rich state because of the rice production in particularly. And by the way, the Africans that came over taught white settlers how to grow rice. That wasn't knowledge that they brought from Europe. They, of course, didn't know that it would be the thing that would cause them to be enslaved for such a long time. But
Right.
also things like irrigation, crop rotation,
Yes.
those, and inoculation. Like we're getting, this vaccine now. The whole idea of inoculation came from an enslaved man that
Yes.
was taught to the doctor who had enslaved him. So,
Yes.
so much that benefits us today comes from our community, comes from enslaved people and from the community. And the other thing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I actually did a speech for Black History Month a couple Sundays ago, and I talked about that we are proud people,
Mhm.
that we were selected for our skills. Yes, we ended up being enslaved, but they knew who they were choosing. And so when you just to bring up this reparations piece again, right? If we were selected and if we then built and invented and created for this country owes us. They owe our ancestors.
Well, one of the things I find most interesting, and I don't know how this is going to play out, but this is really important to me, and this is something that I look at very carefully, because one of the things that African Americans talked with the current president about was about the high rate of debt that African Americans have found themselves in to pay for education. And one of the reasons that, the cost of education has gone up, I believe so much, was to make education not be accessible to people, because that was a way out. So for a lot of my father's generation, his siblings, if you went to school, you got your education, you were able to, even if you had to leave, the Carolinas to do it, you could go into other careers. And of course, there were people from South Carolina who remained, who had amazing careers. But it wasn't the norm because they wanted to incentivize people to still stay, Black people, to stay in agrarian situations. But again, we had family members who still found a way to own land, own homes, to do all these kinds of things. But it was very difficult, even in the last 50 years, to educate a lot of our children because we didn't get the benefit of our family's work. They worked
Yeah.
hard for many, many years and sometimes multiple jobs and owned businesses while they worked, but we didn't get the benefit of what they've done, even on the other side of slavery after emancipation.
Oh,
Um,
totally. Even today.
right. So
Even today.
one of the things that after emancipation and even coming out of oh gosh, when everything, sort of the economy sort of fell in the 1930s and they
Mhm.
were trying to rebuild again, that's when you got a lot of bills that came out that for the military made it possible for the military to people who were in the military to buy homes. So the president at the time, started all these programs, these home buying programs. What they don't know that when these programs were started to help all people who'd served in the military, and most of the people living in Mullins, whose family had come from Mullins or the PD region, my grandfather was in World War I and was on the Leviathan, a ship at the same time with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the assistant secretary of the war at that time, and it was during the flu pandemic. But these programs were started so that if you served in the military, the government was going to help you buy a home. 98% of those home loans went to white soldiers. And so many people who had served in World War I, World War II, and subsequent wars never got the benefit of these programs that were created specifically to help military people.
Yeah. And a couple things that are coming up in the comments, and then we are coming up. I mean, over 30 minutes. So, Ludrine is asking me my profile on ancestry.com because he thinks he's trying to search me, and all I know, I looked, I don't see a code. I think it's just Miko Pickett, but
if that's how you put it in there, if that's how
okay.
you put your name in, then yes, that's how it will show up. So,
Okay. Yep.
yes,
So
but
I'm just
if you're not related, then it won't come up in her search. But if she can still go on to Ancestry and do a members directory search and put your name in, and it will still pull up your information.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's my full name, exactly how it's spelled. And my son is on tonight, and he okay, thank you. And then he says that there is a bill in Congress to study reparations. So, we just got to keep our voices. We got to make sure that our people hear our voices, because there's a lot of folks who do not believe, right, that they're not impacted the way we're impacted. So Congress needs to hear from us, from people who believe that these reparations need to be studied. And there's all kind of ways to do reparations, but we need to be studied. And then from a study, we needed to come to fruition. And there's one last thing I want to say about the DNA. When I took the DNA test, is that just today, when you take it, you get that beautiful map, and it breaks down the percentages for you. But then it also tell you about family members that took the DNA test too. And so there were 3 people who came up that were first or second cousins. And I was like, oh, okay. None of the names I recognize, at all. And then today I was talking to my cousin from Florida, and I told him the 3 names. And I'm like, this guy, Tyheem Phillips, it says he's a first or second cousin. He said, that's my son.
Wow.
I was like, what? His last name was Phillips. I was expecting his last name to be Thomas. So I put the 2 and 2 together just today. So the DNA, 100%. When he told me that today, I said, okay, that just basically made this whole thing completely valid.
Right. Well, the DNA does not lie. And I have my DNA in a couple of different testing sites, as well as another site that matches DNA. And all the results are always the same. And these are companies that are not owned by each other. They're totally different companies.
Okay.
And so I often will say to people, because they have questions, you find out all kinds of things when you do the DNA test. But when they tell me that, well, somebody said differently, I always say, trust the test, because the test really does not lie. Like, it is absolutely what it is. So you're going to find, I've been able to find family that are just finding out for the first time, because they have identified as, Jewish or European American or Latina, that we have a common ancestor from the Carolinas.
Wow.
And they are come from Black family. And so many of them are excited to know that they never knew that this was a part of the history, of their history. Because again, their families may not have told them for multiple reasons, but also there are people from our region who escaped as a part of the Black loyalists. They fought against the revolutionists. So if you are looking, Miko, and you're in your searches and you find family that are in Nova Scotia, most likely they're in settlements, their family were in settlements because they were brought to Nova Scotia and given their freedom by the British because they fought. This is even before we were a country. They were upset by the fact that they're enslaved, and now you've got these founding fathers and these revolutionary people who are talking about they were being treated as slaves by England. And just hearing that language and that they had a right to be free, it incentivized so many people that you're right. I'm not crazy. This is what I've always believed, even, if I was born here. And so you've got thousands of people that, if you've ever seen that, the television show, or if you read the book, which is based on fiction, it's fiction based on reality, the Book of Negroes, those are the names and descriptions of people who escaped. And a lot of those people came from our region in South Carolina.
So on that note, so in my family, on my mother's side, On my mother's side, we're from Greeleyville, South Carolina. And so when I go through my ancestry, you see lots and lots of Greeleyville. And then on my father's side, that family has been in the New Jersey, Pennsylvania area since the 1800s. So my son is actually on, he has a question. He says that were the ancestors in PA, the ones that were there in 1850s, likely free people?
Not necessarily. And I'll tell you why. Because a lot of the slaveholders in what we call the South or the Lower South also had owned homes in like Philadelphia, all those places. So for instance, a branch of my family are the Butlers, and they are associated with the Revolutionary War, what would have been called a hero back in the day, Pierce Butler. He had properties in Pennsylvania. And so enslaved people were, taken back and forth all the time. And so, so just because they were, in the North, because there were enslaved people living in New York as well. Central Park was one of the places that when people were finally free because they had been enslaved in New York, it used to be a Black community.
Yeah.
And so slavery, it may not have been as prevalent as it was here in the South, but it existed in northern states as well.
And so another question is, where could we go? And actually, two things. I have really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
So if somebody is listening and they're interested in doing the same, if you could tell them about the process that they would need to follow, and also if you can weave into that, where can we go to learn more about the people on our tree? So we got people on our tree that have been found. So how does somebody get involved, get their DNA test done so they can get these results that I got? And then once you get these results and you have this tree, how do you drill in to find out more about those people on your tree?
Okay, so as far as getting the DNA test done, there are lots of very good, reliable tests, and it just depends upon what you're looking for as far as the results. Now, for me in particular, I just wanted to know like all the parts of me, which is why the test that I took initially was the ancestry.com. But there are some people who are not even interested in that. They want to know what region specifically in Africa. So if you will Google, there are even some African American owned DNA companies, and their focus is to find out what regions and tribes you belong to in Africa. So you can do those tests. There's 23andMe. There are a slew of them now. And I will say they're pretty much all reliable. And the testing, the way that you test is typically the same. Either they'll do the swab, but most now have moved to that little, as Miko calls it, the gross little spit cup. But again, and you literally go online, you order the test, they will send you the kit. They ask you just to go online and create an account so that they can attach your results to something. And then usually between 4 to 6 weeks, you get your results back. And again, it will, depending upon what you want to know, like you can make all of your information private so that no one knows who you are. Like on my DNA test, because I'm doing this research, I'm not listed as Pamela Bailey, because everybody's going to go and see, and I want people to be able to report to me truthfully if we're family, right?
Right.
And then there are going to be people who don't want to take the DNA test. Within our community, just like with the vaccine, people are afraid, and that's because for hundreds of years we were experimented on. For hundreds of years, we've gone through so much within the medical community. So while I am definitely going to take the vaccine, I want to say I understand the fear. I never want to tell people that it's not real, that it's baseless. It is true. But same with the DNA test. People are afraid to take the DNA test because they know that sometimes law enforcement may decide to use DNA results without our permission, and that can happen. So I always just respect when somebody doesn't want to do it. I say then go the genealogy route, and then align yourself with someone who's closely related to you who may be willing to share their results with you, so that you can make sure both things are matching up. But to ask the question, where do you start? I was able to find so many things beyond with the DNA test are the results are because I listen to family stories. I had an Aunt Lucy Mae Campbell who lived in the community, and she passed away in her late 90s. Aunt Lucy Mae gave me so much information right before she passed away, but she always talked to my father and the people in his generation about it. And so my father gave me a lot of information. If you have particularly older family members, ask them if you can talk with them. Ask them if you can record them, even if you don't put their picture up there, just turn on the recorder and hear what they've got to say. So many things about my family that I would not have known had it not been for that. Like, I didn't know that my family had the Gullah Geechee roots. But when my mother would tell me stories about ghosts and talk about the haints, or she would say that my grandmother would pronounce certain words when she was angry, I realized later that saying words certain ways came from the Gullah culture.
Right.
And
Yes.
so they're clues that your family has. So interview those oldest relatives, find out from them, and don't just say, well, where do I come from? Tell them to tell you stories about their childhoods or stories that their parents or grandparents may have told him, because there are jewels within, the layers of those stories that if you're really interested in mining them, you're going to find out about it. And then the other thing, because South Carolina was such a huge important part of American history, you got to start reading those books. There's no way around it. And I'll
Mhm.
share with you at a later time some of the books that I've read, Miko, that specifically talk about the PD region of South Carolina, because it was very important as far as the Revolutionary War was concerned. Even with, I think it was World War II, there was a bomb that was dropped in Mars Bluff. It never did explode, but that was a big incident that was recorded. So our community is a very historic community, which is
Yes.
another thing that I'm very, very proud of.
Okay. Well, you know what? This has been just amazing. The conversation has been very engaging. I am so okay. So people want to know those books. Okay. So when you get a chance, just send me the name of the books, and I
Mhm.
will definitely post on my page so you guys can have access to all those books. And to my son that's out there listening, I'm going to give you my username and password to our ancestry.com. He's brilliant. I'm not. It's a lot to navigate. I'm sure you'll be able to figure it all out. So thank
Absolutely.
you so much, Miss Bailey. It has just been amazing. You have made my day. You've changed me as a person. So
Oh,
I thank you so much.
that's so amazing. Again, I want to thank you for having me. I want to say to all the folks out there that I can't actually see, but Mullins is my heart. I love you. I'm so upset that because of the pandemic, I have not been able to get home since 2019. And I
Yeah.
try to come back several times during the year, but I will let everybody know when I'm going to be in town. Maybe we can have a meetup with you and do something really fun to talk about this history. And if you would just share my website as well, which is
Yeah.
just thebigfamilysearch.com, and you'll
You
find out a
got it.
lot about this history.
You got it. You got it. We'll be following.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So, y'all, whoo, that was great. I mean, we went over an hour. I did not expect that, but so much came out of that. So I'm gonna just leave y'all with one last thing. So tomorrow, my husband and I, we are getting our vaccination. Yes, I'm getting closer and closer to freedom, right? So we're getting our vaccination, and I implore you, there's 3 going on this week. Tomorrow it's going to be, there's a mass vaccination clinic in Britain's Neck. On Wednesday, there is one in Sellers. And on Thursday, there is one in Nichols. And still, there's plenty of appointments, which tells me that we're not signing up, right? So tomorrow, I signed up, and we're actually taking 2 of our friends, right? So please, please, please spread the word. Help people who may not know or may not have access. And we're actually going to be doing more work on the ground around this to get the word out. Because remember, Marion County, those that live in Marion County, oh yeah, you got yours on Saturday. All right, Ramika. So, because the thing is that we're 60 to 70% African American, 70% in the cities, in the city limits. We got to get to 70% of us vaccinated for the rest of us to be safe. We cannot afford to say, oh, let somebody else do it. We're all in this together. And I hope my DNA test has proved that we're all part of one family and we all live in this community together. So please do your research. Please get your appointments. And by the way, Marion County, we all qualify. Every single person in Marion County qualifies as 1B. Every single person qualifies as 1B. So get your appointment. Bye, guys. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.